the American academic establishment, good sir, has been abusing and exploiting its unique tax status and its unique custody of a unique global responsibility and certainly national responsibility. They're responsible for the boundaries and core curriculum and core messaging as it relates to the young people of America, both our highest performers and then everybody down the line to our lowest performers. But a lot of attention at, let's say, the upper 10%, the upper quartile of the educational infrastructure, specifically the Ivy League and a lot of the other sort of elite institutions. And those institutions have abused their position. Harvard runs basically a tax-free hedge fund at their endowment. Yale, I could, not to pick on Harvard specifically, but Harvard's sort of the most notorious for such activities. The Ivy League institutions have been running tax-free. It's the same way people criticize the church, that they take a unique tax status and they abuse it, or any nonprofit for that matter. And because of that abuse, they have now made themselves vulnerable to political attacks, which has been accruing over the course of the past couple of decades. And now they find themselves in the crosshairs of a new political administration that's taking advantage of their history of arrogance and abuse of their status. And as a result, they're now being denied or impaired or have an adversary in the executive branch in the federal government. That I personally think that adversarialism is counterproductive. I could even go so far as to say destructive. But much as I blame the current Republican administration and the Trump presidency on the Democratic Party's arrogance and abuse and indifference to the electorate, empowering such an alternative, I would say that the academic world has been similarly arrogant and abusive of their status, and now has invited an adversary. And specifically what I mean is the Trump administration coming in to say, listen, we're not going to pay for research funding the way that we used to. We're not going to hire people that the government won't hire graduates of institutions that teach curriculums we don't approve of, which is a horrible thing. I mean, it's not that statements like this are horrifying to me. Like, you're telling me that the government's going to dictate curriculums? I mean, it's full dear leader, full sort of communist nightmare, right? And so there's sort of two worlds here. One, I guess we need to address the actual liabilities with any government going to take control of the college curriculum, who gets hired, who gets funded, what gets funded, all these things, which is the number one issue. And then also the pre-existing condition, which is institutions like MIT and Harvard charging 60% of a research grant as for so-called indirect funding. So that you give them $1 million to research cancer, and $600,000 goes to administration, salaries, and only $400,000 of it goes to actual research. So there's all these sort of pools of abuse within academia, which I believe opened themselves up to now what I think is a further degradation, which is now the government is trying to control curriculums, restricting funding, and all of those things. And so obviously there's a couple of issues here. One, I guess the question would be, how dangerous, how bad is it to have the government attacking education? I think it's almost self-evident what the answer to that is. Two, whether you agree with me that the educational institutions made themselves vulnerable to something like this is neither here nor there. But I think that more relevant thing is, what can the academic institutions do now to defend themselves against the government further interfering with what gets taught, how it gets taught, what gets funded, how it gets funded, and basically clean up their reputation so that people are not so happy to see them punished. Because a lot of people see the headlines and like, thank God, these guys have been ripped. The Harvard has been taking advantage of the tax code for decades, and it's high time somebody held them accountable. So I just think it's on one hand, it's a simple issue. Of course, the government shouldn't fuck around or screw around with education. On the other hand, we've got to be in a pretty sloppy situation where you're even vulnerable to something like that.
There's so many different verticals that you just touched on, but I think we should start because everybody's going to be in agreement on the government withholding funding for research, for scientific research, for social research, for curriculum and everything else. The government dictating curriculum is absolutely a non-starter for virtually anybody in this country with half a brain. And I don't even think that's negotiable. I mean, I think you need, that's the foundation. That is the literal foundation of what this country is built on. And anything outside of that is just disgusting and is not negotiable. That's not negotiable. But
exactly,
you brought up something to start off this, and you talked about, you can't talk about Harvard. In my opinion, you can't talk about Harvard because Harvard is an outlier. There's a lot of universities in this country that are amazing institutions of higher education that are struggling to survive. Harvard, on the other hand, has a $60 billion, $54 billion endowment and can afford to give free tuition to everybody if they wanted to. So it's a different situation. But there's a couple things that are broken.
The point is, it's not indicative of the industry. It's
Harvard is not. Harvard absolutely is not. Harvard, Yale, the Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, push them out as outliers, okay? They're not struggling to survive. But many other higher institutions in this country, including state schools, are having a very difficult time. And there's many problems there which we should address. But there's one thing that you started off with, which is talking about the tax code and the advantages and taking advantage of the tax code. And to me, this really bothers me because, one, for somebody who's long been fighting to change tax code, we all admit the tax code. We all understand tax code's broken. It needs to be changed. But what bothers me is the hypocrisy of an administration where the leaders of that administration and the biggest contributors to that administration are equally at fault for all the same reasons that you're blaming Harvard or any other school for taking the tax code.
Trump is famous for saying, "I didn't break the law. I'm just smart. I just."
That's exactly right. I didn't break the law.
But Harvard would say, "We're just smart. Like these are the rules."
Trump's the first person who's going to say, "Hey, I'm a multi-billionaire and I've never paid any taxes." Okay, and he's just
the rules.
He's the tip of the
optimization.
He's the tip of the iceberg because he's the top of the food chain because he's leader of the free world. But I promise you, from Zuckerberg to Bezos to Elon Musk, even to Warren Buffett, who's complained that he underpays taxes, to Jamie Dimon, to everybody else, all of these creatures at the top of the food chain that I'm not saying that these are the guys bitching about it, but you could take it a couple steps down, to some of the knuckleheads or knuckle draggers in the Senate and Congress who complain, the Tommy Tubervilles of the world who complain, oh my God, Harvard's got, they're not paying their taxes. They don't pay any taxes. That's their whole scam.
Politically convenient. The hope, of course.
It's the biggest pool of hypocrisy, and you can drown in it, and it drives me crazy. So let's stop all this bullshit because that's something that's a non-starter for me. And if you want to, let's address the real problem. We have a tax code problem. We have a tax code problem for the rich. We have a tax code problem in some cases for education, but you can't use Harvard as the example because for one Harvard, there's 1,000 institutions that are struggling.
Okay, but what about the cultural issue, which is the perception that academic institutions are the foundation of far left ideology?
All the
ideological.
How stupid is that? So what you're basically saying is, if you're smart, you're far left, but if you're dumb, you're far right. So we're better off keeping everybody dumb? Like that's the most ridiculous thing ever. Like that is just idiotic.
Here's how I see it. I mean, just very, simply, I have a million criticisms. I think you have to set aside the very valid critique available for academia. Okay.
Sure.
But, the same way there's valid criticism of the tax code. But again, to selectively choose, it's the academic institutions, but it's not the billionaires or whatever it is. But you're in a situation right now where, setting aside whose fault it is and who's in charge of it and what to do about it, the United States is the leading country in the world, or has been the leading country in the world in terms of innovation and discovery, research and discovery. Heart transplant, lung transplant, liver transplant, whatever. And it's been a global magnet for the best minds in science and math around the world, whether it's people from Russia, people from Japan, people from Germany, people from Brazil. They want to come to America because America is the place where their brains can have the most resources and have the most opportunity to reach their maximum potential, which has been one of the things that has set America apart from every other country in the world. So if you're at the top of the academic food chain in any other country, America has been same as it's a magnet for capital, it's a magnet for research, I'll say.
Okay.
Cancer research, whatever. My biggest concern right now is that, one, because of the abuse, let me just give you a piece of context, because I'm an investor in a small private biotechnology company. So I just have some visibility to how, and that company relies primarily on grant funding, whether it's from whatever, it could be from anybody, but it includes the NIH. 60%, 60 cents on the dollar goes to it. So for every dollar of grant funding that company receives, 60 cents does not go to research. It's called an indirect cost. And most people don't know this, and blah, 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 blah. So we'll say, oh, there's billions of research. Well, of those billions of research, 60 cents on the dollar is not going to research. My point is not just to criticize that. My point is, when you abuse your position, you make yourself vulnerable to be taken down. And so you have an issue of arrogance and abuse, in my opinion, within academia that then has made them vulnerable to these attacks. But the ultimate risk right now is that America is going to become less and less of a magnet for global innovation and global science. And that is a catastrophic. The same way I believe the Trump administration is risking the perceived stability and reliability of the U.S. government as a counterparty, which is why I think the market's done what they've done. I think the other thing that's being put in play here is, will America continue to be the magnet for global research? And I believe that it is a combination of a self-inflicted injury due to the arrogance and abuse of the academic executives. And now you've got an administration that is malicious and hypocritical and destructive in nature and will exploit any opportunity to attack people who don't support them.
But you're forgetting one key thing. They're also dumb because they don't understand what collateral damage is in a true social and international and a collaborative ecosystem. And if you're going to succeed, you're going to raise capital, you're going to finance things, you're going to give people an opportunity to be innovative. You have to create an environment where there's opportunity all over. You can't just keep all the opportunity in your own little ecosystem. And so you don't realize the collateral damage that you're doing with all these policies, trying to close everything off and say, F you to the rest of the world. And that's not.
But you're saying this is bigger than academia. This is the sort of the incentive to circumvent America.
Well, everything starts in academia because, so first of all, in order to put yourself in a position to be competitive, this is where Putin screwed up. This is where China screwed up because China originally, basically, if you wanted higher education and you wanted your kids to be successful, you sent your kids, if you were in China, to America. If you had successful and crazy smart kids in Russia, you sent them to the US at some part of their education. Every brilliant Russian technologist that I used over the last 25 years all studied for 1 or 2 years in the US. No US kid ever went to the university, to the MIT equivalent in St. Petersburg, the St. Petersburg Institute of Technology, whatever, I think that's what it's called. It's like their MIT. But no U.S. kid ever went there that I know. Nobody. Language reasons, you can't do it. It's all isolated. You can't even get into school, blah, blah, blah. And so everybody sends their kids here, but they don't send their kids here. It's not just a learning thing. It's a networking thing. It's a cultural thing. It's learning how capitalism works. It's learning how free markets work in addition to innovation. Now, when you screw up like Putin did and invade another country and you have this brain drain, you set your country back decades because everybody's gone. All those genius kids that went to St. Petersburg Institute of Technology, they're gone. They're in other countries. They're in Georgia. They're in Portugal. They're in Germany. They're in the U.S.
They're in Italy.
They're in Italy. They're everywhere
London.
everywhere but Russia now. China, when they sent all those kids over here for graduate programs, we would do these tours of America and we'd go from school to school to school, whether it be Pepperdine or ITT in Chicago or all these different University of Chicago, every kid in that class in the graduate programs was Chinese. And I'm like, what the hell? What's going on here? And it's like, you know what? Everybody sent everybody here. And same with kids from India and other places, because everybody knows it's not just the education piece. You can get great education anywhere in the world. There's smart people all over, but it's the networking piece. It's the cultural piece. It's learning to adapt into a true free market. And what ends up happening from that, if we go the opposite way here, we're just taking the worst that everybody else had to experience and putting our own kids and our own systems through that. And that's the worst part about this. That's what happens when you dictate curriculum. That's what happens when you dictate policy or when you start to play games with federal subsidies and loans and different commitments to support education. Okay, you have to do it across the board. You have to spray the infield. That's how it works. I mean, that's how American higher education. Is it perfect? No. Should it be a pay-for-play system and certain degrees should cost more money than other degrees? So we want plenty of nurses. We need social workers. Okay, we need all that stuff. We don't want everybody to think, oh my God, I got to take data science, or I have to take AI, or I have to be in entrepreneurship, or whatever it is. We need everybody to continue our whole ecosystem. But it should be a pay-for-play. And that makes total sense. And everybody kind of gets that. And the tax code is screwed up. But Dylan, at the same time, we can't have the hypocrisy of saying, hey, you know, the government can't play both ways. They can't, fund their friends. Like you can't say, hey, you know what? I'm only going to fund the space programs that support me. I'm only going to fund the defense programs that support me. I'm only going to fund the car manufacturers that support me. I'm only going to fund the educational institutions and the universities that support me. Can't do that.
I mean, with all due respect, that's Trump 101. I mean, Trump.
I know, but here's the problem. This is what happens when you have somebody who has a certain ideology, but doesn't understand what he's doing. That's the scary part. He could not explain this. He can just try to execute it. It's very different. Being able to explain the repercussions of what he's doing and being able to explain, hey, this is why it's going to lead to something different has never been done. They've never explained that. All they do is just pounce on the fear.
But, you know, and Trump is the most obvious in this behavior, where takes care of his friends, punishes his and
of course
takes care of his perceived friends, punishes his perceived enemies, including everybody in New York State that didn't vote for him, everybody in Illinois that didn't vote for him.
But it's not. This is not even just a Trump piece, because the American.
But my point is, Joe Biden also was like, I'm going to ignore Elon Musk and I'm only going to pay attention to General Motors. Like, my point is, it's not only Trump. It's
no, I totally agree. It's not only Trump. And what's worse is we have a system, the way our government's set up and the way it's supposed to work is that different branches have a certain amount of checks and balances, of independence, and there's supposed to be some bipartisan agreements on different things. And this way you're supposed to check everybody, keep everybody in line. It's called self-policing. And all of a sudden, we've kind of lost that. We don't have any self-policing anymore. Even really smart people now go like, I don't care. Whatever he says is good for me. Like, you know, that's not how we work. And that's the challenge.
So bringing all this, so let's assume that there's consent, that we're at a vulnerable moment. We're at a vulnerable moment in terms of the perceived stability of U.S. as a policy counterparty. We're at a vulnerable moment in terms of the perceived stability of America as the global magnet for academics. the markets have sold off to whatever degree. Pick your index, pick your favorite thing. I'll call it, a 10% reduction in the value of everything on average. Obviously, some things much more, some things less. A 10% reduction in the value of everything as a diminishment of the net value as a compression of all global value as a result of these perceived risks and instabilities. I still hold the opinion that this is a discounting because things like the reliability of the U.S. as a counterparty or the reliability of the U.S. as an academic magnet have been put at risk. But I do not believe that they are lost or have been. I believe it is just a perception that there is risk associated with those things, which has not existed before, not that those things are lost.
Okay.
And so the question from an investor standpoint is, okay, well, if the markets are cheaper because of there's an elevated risk premium, net risk premium, however you want to calculate that, should I be long America or short America, basically, at this moment? As manifest through my sentiment in the S&P 500, let's say.
Well, here's the thing. When you say long America versus short America, until proven otherwise, which you can't be short America versus long somebody else, unless you think somebody else is grossly oversold relative to us, which I don't know. Agreed. I don't even know if that's the case. And until proven otherwise, I wouldn't even suggest at this point. America's bigger than America's always outlasted, and whoever is kind of in charge. It doesn't really matter. America's the way our economy is set up, the way our economy works. And as long as we're able to keep the flow of money moving around and being circular, it's almost impossible for the executive branch to screw that up, no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's Trump. It doesn't matter if it was Biden. It doesn't matter if it's two other people that we've never even heard of. It's almost impossible to screw that up. And so, I mean, certain countries have managed to screw it up. Russia screwed it up. China screwed it up. A bunch of places have screwed it up. But in America, we're almost too big to fail, if that makes any sense. We're a little bit like JP Morgan. We're almost too big to fail. Where are you going to
go? What are you going to do?
Where are you going to go is exactly right. So we're almost too big to fail. So I don't actually worry about that so much. I don't worry about should we sell America and buy something else, because until proven otherwise, you always have to be long America. You don't have to be long anything else. It has never paid.
Agreed. And so, but I'm saying if I agree with that. So, I mean, this is, and again, I know that I recognize. So then I look at the sell-off in the Magnificent Seven. I look at the Amazon chart or the Apple chart or anybody can look at any of these charts. And I think to myself, maybe not from that if you loved it, 2 months ago, how can you not like it today? In other words, I just wonder the degree to which, especially as vol comes in,
Hold on. There's definitely things that have changed. I agree with if you loved the S&Ps, or you loved the NASDAQ, or you loved the Russell or whatever, the small cap index 2 months ago, then yeah, it's more attractive today. But there are individual stocks in there that a lot of us thought were ahead of themselves, like a lot of the AI stocks, like a lot of the different sectors. I felt like they were a little ahead of themselves. There's nothing wrong with a little sector rotation. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, you know what? The Russell might have been cheap, or the Dow might have been cheap relative to the NASDAQ or the S&Ps or that kind of stuff. So I don't have any problem with rotating capital, moving it around. And I also think that certain stocks have put themselves in very vulnerable positions. Like, for example, Tesla has put themselves into a vulnerable position. It's a self-inflicted. And companies do that.
No question. But I separate Tesla because of the obvious reason.
Fine,
I think,
separate Tesla. Yeah. Other companies are in vulnerable positions just because of the size of the run-up, not because of anything political. But I would say there's different AI companies that, they got a little ahead of themselves, maybe.
Here's what I'm thinking. Obviously, cutting research funding, sticking with the academics, cutting research funding or using the leverage of access to funding relative to if your curriculum is not the curriculum that I approve of, then I won't give you money. If this is a government talking, or if your curriculum is not the curriculum I approve of, I won't hire your graduates. Or if the curriculum is not the curriculum I approve of, I'll change your tax status or whatever it is. And obviously that can have a significant short-term impact, devastating, actually impact on people's academic careers, on the pace of research on critical Alzheimer's, cancer, all the things we worry about. On the other hand, even if it's just a scorched earth of assault upon academia for the next 4 years or something, or even the next 2 years, where are they going to go ultimately? Are they going to go to Cambridge and Oxford? I mean, the obvious thing was, they'll go to the best educational institutions in England would be the most obvious alternative. But no, they're not going to do that, obviously.
No,
they're not going to go to the Sorbonne. They're not going to go to Politecnico in Milan. They're not going to go to your St. Petersburg Tech. And so big academia, if you will, American academia, is also too big to fail.
Yeah,
I guess is what I'm getting at.
Well,
I don't worry long term about the relevance or magnetism of American academia.
Either do I.
But I do think that there's a probability of delaying breakthroughs in the short term in critical diseases and critical, research will be delayed.
That's common sense. If you don't embrace science, yes, of course. The answer is of course. If you try to dictate policy to dictate science research, that is insanity.
Well, even just to dictate the curriculum period, even beyond science, right? Where it's
right. You're right. Though American institutions, the best institutions in America, have no risk because the reason that people come to the U.S. to study is not because they think MIT is better than some school in Russia or China, or because they think that, Harvard is better than Oxford. The reason kids come from Cambridge and Oxford to study in the US is for opportunity. That's all it is. And that's something.
The network and the fact that the English language is the global business of commerce.
That's right.
Or global language of commerce. Sorry.
That's right. That's why somebody would come from Russia to study at MIT, some rocket scientist, or somebody would come from Israel, or somebody would come from India to study at Berkeley. They're going to go to a school in the U.S. because that's where the opportunity is. You want to be in Silicon Valley. You want to be in front of those professors and in front of those universities and that in those networks there. That's how you get to the next level. Of
course. The issue, I think, is sort of there's the emotional component of mourning the delay that the world is becoming more, that when you have, how do I say this? When you have selective targeting of policy based on who's for me or against me, as a leadership of anything, you slow down the rate of productivity and innovation, period. And when you slow down the rate of productivity and innovation, period, you reduce the present value of all future earnings because you have a less efficient system that's less productive and less innovative. And so I guess you could, the most bearish thing you could say is not that they're going to lose, academics are going to lose their magnetism, or that America is going to lose its status, but that the net value of the overall economy of America is less than it would otherwise be because the rate of innovation is slowing down.
Sure. And that's a real risk. And that's a risk that people who believe in the power of the intellectual community, they respect that and they support that and they invest in that. And that's the risk of the people that don't believe in that and that fundamentally think we're better off if they make the decisions. And that's a real risk because those are the people that aren't bright enough to be making those decisions that are trying to make those decisions. And that is the really scary part.
Yeah, it's alarming. Right? It's stupidity is its own. The market is down, in my opinion. I mean, one of the reasons the market is lower than it was a few months ago is that the average decision at the federal government level is seen to be as increasingly stupid. And the stupider the decision making is, the lower the net value of everything is.
I mean, why else would you eliminate? This is what I can never understand. And I don't care what the arguments to me are insane. Why else do you eliminate lifelong people that have committed an entire career, basically their lives, to scientific research in the US, and they're essentially lifers. They're lifers, and you get rid of everybody. And you drop it under the heading of cost savings, under excessive waste. It's all bullshit. Nobody wants to. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world to say, hey, let's get rid of all the waste. Of course, let's get rid of all the waste. Who doesn't want to do that? Every CEO, every person, every parent, everybody wants to get rid of. Nobody wants waste. So it's an easy thing to say.
Yeah, of course.
But you know what? Let's get rid of all the waste. You know what? We're gonna fire your mom tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? Let's we have a family meeting. We have a family meeting and we decided, okay, your mom's got to go. And the next family meets, they go, you know what? Grandma out. It's a waste. Dad out. Hey, this kid, second born, you're not contributing. You're out. I mean, that's how arbitrary and ridiculous this is.
And I think that is easy. That is not a point of contest. It brings up for me the investor discussion, which is, should I be taking advantage of the decline in the value of financial assets that is tied to this phenomenon, or is the decline in the value of financial assets that's tied to this phenomenon appropriate? And the only thing to do is to sort of wait it out or hold the line on the things that I have a stronger conviction on. In other words, do you see opportunity in the sell-off that's being triggered by this whole cacophony of activity? Is a question that I'm asking. Not anybody. And
I can't answer that because I don't know. I mean, as a trader, I think things got a little cheap last week, or 2 days ago. As a long-term investor, I don't really do well thinking like that. So, I don't think like a passive investor. So I can't really. I'm sure there are plenty of people that think, you know what? Yeah, this is a great buying opportunity. I think about it as a trader. I think it's probably a decent trade. But if they turned and went a little bit lower here, wouldn't surprise me.
Sure. You said something back. This is right when the cabinet members were candidates. And there's a lot of discussion. Oh, well, so-and-so is not qualified. This guy's a Fox News host. How can he beat the Secretary of Defense? Blah, blah, blah. And you said something that I thought was pretty insightful that I think is actually very relevant to what's happening right now. Because everybody's like, oh, this person's not qualified. They're not qualified. And you said, well, who knows from qualified? You didn't actually say that. You said, regardless of whether they are qualified or not, and obviously some of these people are not qualified, I sympathize with the president's preference for loyalty over everything else. And so maybe party boy or party girl is not the most qualified person for the job, but they're the person that he perceives to be the most loyal. And through that, and that rang very true for me when you said that, whenever it was 2 months ago or 6 weeks ago or whatever. I would argue that the same mentality right now is the answer to your question, which is why fire all these lifers? Because the primary filter for who stays and who goes is not are they valuable, not do they contribute, or not are they qualified, not any of these things, but quite simply, are they loyal to me? And if they are not loyal to me, they must go.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not how democracies work. And I think everybody would take a really good lesson from sports in this case. There have been plenty of times when owners and GMs have hired like the guy in the booth, the announcer, and the color guy, the announcer in the booth, and said, you know what? You make so much damn sense on everything you talk about all the time when I'm listening to the game that you should be running this.
Chicago Talk Radio,
everything. You should be running this team. I'm thinking of like, these are ex-baseball players anyway, like the Hawk Harrelsons of the world that went from, the broadcast booth down to being, the GM, that kind of thing. There's plenty of cases like that, lots of them. They never work. They never, ever work. They're always failures. When you hire the person that's loyal to you, never works. When you hire the person that doesn't have the experience, never works. They're all failures. And in sports, the same people that would jump up and down and say, this is the dumbest damn thing ever. You can't hire that guy from the booth. You can't be the coach of this team, are the same people that are saying, oh man, this is brilliant. Like, it's just the hypocrisy of all of it drives me nuts.
I mean, but that's why, again, I feel like hypocrisy is the defining variable. Like that is the central organizing principle of all political discussion. It's hypocrisy. And
maybe it's all just maybe it's all intentional.
Which is why
But
I think it's also why people are attracted to finance in sports.
Yeah.
Because finance and sports are less tolerant of that. There's more direct and immediate penalties for idiotic behavior.
Exactly.
Whereas idiotic behavior, it perpetuates itself in politics in a way that's impossible in sports or impossible in finance.
The only thing in politics that I can't figure out is how much of it is just PR and how much of it is marketing as opposed to how much of it is real. I think it's very hard for us to, as a consumer or as part of society, just to be able to figure out, how much of it's real and how much of it's just poker, how much of it's a bluff, how much of it's just
totally agree.
You're trying to game, like how much of it's just a big damn game. Like, how do they go back and close doors afterwards and just freaking laugh about it and go, oh man, look at we played these idiots, And I kind of
hit the beehive. The beehive is buzzing now. That'll keep them busy.
And I kind of fear that sometimes, not all the time for sure, because I don't have enough intellectual respect for them to think that they're capable of that. But sometimes I think that there's just, you know what, this is just a game, and they're just seeing how far can we push it? How close to the edge? How much gas is left in the tank?
I mean, I'll give you the same advice I give myself and that I give to sort of other family members and friends, which is the less you watch the news, the better you will feel.
Oh,
if you want to watch Sports Center, watch the trading screen, like don't even get into consume. The news is designed to make you insane. So the less, the better.
My cable broke. I'm not even fixing it. I don't want to know.